And I would say we know that obese individuals have more muscle because they are required to carry around more weight. But you mentioned something that was really smart. Healthy muscle. Something that happens that we know that affects skeletal muscle is if your skeletal muscle is infiltrated with extra substrates, it turns it's like marbleized, like a marbleized steak. So you can have muscle, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's healthy. And it's called lipotoxicity.
So there's some like fat strains throughout the muscle. You don't want that.
No.
You want to be like the fillet.
You want to be like the fillet
of your muscle.
But it becomes very interesting when we think about, is it the amount of muscle? Well, I've thought about this a lot, and I'm actually working on my first book, and one of the things in clinical practice that I see, and of course every physician will tell you, is that they go in and we look at body fat percentage or BMI, which arguably, is kind of
Is that the wrong metric? Is that the wrong metric we should be looking at?
It's body mass index. It's the wrong metrics.
What should we be looking at?
Well, we should be looking at skeletal muscle. And there's ways in which we're beginning to look at it, and that's appendicular lean mass or skeletal mass index, but they're not perfect. And it's not the standard of care. The standard of care is always focused on the problem. It's what is your percent body fat? In fact, we don't even have great ways in which we measure skeletal muscle that are able to reach everybody. For example, the best way to do it would be an MRI or CT or even an ultrasound to look at the tissue quality. That's not feasible.
Really?
So we've made it very easy to look at fat tissue, and we've become obsessed with fat, which arguably so there's a reason it's homogeneous, meaning, typically a lot of your fat would look the same as mine, whereas skeletal muscle is different.
So how do we track it then? What's the best way? How do you do it?
Well, I use a bioimpedance, and that's...
Is that a machine?
Yep, it's a machine. It's the best thing that we have right now.
Does it scan your body?
It
What
does.
does it do?
It does. It scans your body. It's a bioelectrical impedance machine.
It's called bioimpedance.
Yep, a BIA.
BIA.
And it's really interesting because when you look at in the literature, there's variations in terms of quality of machine, in terms of what, what those measurements are. But the next phase, if we can shift from fat to muscle-centric, we can now start looking at important endpoints.
What
I mean by
endpoints?
important endpoints. So for example, eventually, I hope, we'll be able to look at you and say, hey, Louis, this is how much muscle mass you should be for optimal health. And I'm not just talking about optimal health in the moment, I'm talking about your survivability. So someone will look at you and go, yeah, Louis is healthy, he has enough muscle mass, he's doing great. Well, right now, in your 30s and your 40s, this is the time to build tissue. So the endpoints that we look at during these times of aging are going to be different. So what does that mean specifically?
When you mean tissue, you mean muscle?
I mean muscle.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Building it everywhere, or focusing on the main muscle groups, or?
I think that having a way of life that is functional is something that has become optional for us now. One of the reasons that is because everything is easy.
Yes.
Escalator, we are not required to do physical activity.
You can eat food whenever you want, as much sugar and calories everywhere.
But before, we were forced for movement. It was required to survive.
Right.
So the endpoints and the skeletal muscle that we're looking at now, we don't necessarily know what the optimal skeletal muscle mass should be.
Yeah.
We don't know.
So just build though, and stay flexible, stay healthy,
stay flexible,
reduce inflammation,
and understand that it is not about losing fat. That is a losing, no pun intended, game. And if it were correct, we would have solved for it.
We're all obese.
We haven't solved for it.
So instead of focusing on losing fat, we should be focusing on building muscle.
We should be focusing on building muscle. And again, the locomotion aspect of muscle is common in what everybody thinks about.
Okay.
That is only one component of what skeletal muscle is. Skeletal muscle is an endocrine organ.
Endocrine organ.
So
what is
for
that?
example, like the thyroid, it secretes thyroid hormone. Muscle is an organ. When you contract it, it secretes myokines. Myokines, and these are proteins that go throughout the body and have impact on all tissues.
Not mitochondria.
No. I mean, muscle does have mitochondria, which is really important, but think of a myokine as you are exercising, you're actually secreting myokines.
Okay. And why is that important?
Why is it important? I'm so glad you asked. There's many different kinds of myokines, and I'm gonna give you one example. Maybe I'll give you two. Interleukin-6 is the most well-studied myokine, and this comes from contracting skeletal muscle, and whether it is aerobic or resistance training, this amount increases 100-fold into the bloodstream. And this is work by Penderson, and she, I believe, is in Copenhagen. She is a exercise physiologist, immunologist, physician, kind of incorporating an interface. Interleukin-6, when secreted from skeletal muscle, interfaces with the immune system. So macrophages are cells of the immune system that also secrete a cytokine. We've heard of cytokines.
Okay.
Interleukin-6, when it comes from macrophages, is a cytokine.
Okay.
This molecule, when it's secreted from skeletal muscle, is anti-inflammatory and helps regulate immune response as well as systemic inflammation.
And so this happens when you're building muscle.
When you are building muscle, when you are exercising. Let's talk about brain function. Exercising muscle releases BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Goes to the brain, goes to multiple areas of the body to make impact. Muscle is not just about fitness, it's the organ of longevity. It is responsible for the way in which we age and the pinnacle, not the peripheral. Right now, the way in which the current conversation is, we think about skeletal muscle and we think about exercise as something to look good in a bikini.
Yeah.
But that is only one small aspect of skeletal muscle. It is the metabolic regulator. When you think about Alzheimer's disease, type 3 diabetes of the brain.
Did you know muscle was the solution?
Yes, I did.
How did you know?
I happen to be trained by one of the world-leading protein experts. He's mentored me for 2 decades. His name is Dr. Donald Lehman, and he is an academic professor. He's a professor emeritus from University of Illinois.
Wow.
And he actually, some of the nutritional aspects are some things that he discovered. So he has been doing this for, he's gonna be really angry at me, like 40 years. Yeah, 40 years, and is really considered one of the finest researchers in this area. So I did my undergraduate with him. I did my undergraduate in human nutrition, vitamin, mineral metabolism, and worked on a lot of human studies, a lot of rodent studies.
Sure.
And he was focused on muscle. Very early on, I really thought about muscle as the pinnacle, but then you go through medical school, then you do a couple residencies, and then everything comes full circle.
And come back to nutrition and building
and then,
muscle.
Right, and then it comes full circle. And
because in medical school, they didn't teach you any of that, right?
But I'd already been trained 5 years in nutritional sciences.
Gotcha, but they try to teach you everything else about just treat the symptom with the medicine.
Which is a flaw,
but important.
But is important because without having really credentialed training in that way, then I would miss the things that were really dangerous.
Sure.
I really valued that education, but I knew if I really cared about how I was going to move the needle for people, it had to be solution oriented.
Interesting.